Hey everyone, Vale here at Mobalytics, and today we're going to be taking a closer look at the new hybrid Corki build, which is absolutely popping off at the moment. It was spotted on the Chinese servers, and now due to Midbeast and other big content creators bringing it to light, we're seeing it soar in popularity in other regions too. Hopefully in this video we can explain just why it's so good and how you can actually go about playing it. So Corki has actually been exceptionally strong for quite some time now, especially in those higher ELOs. He has immense scaling, great poke, and his passive is actually one of the most underrated abilities in the entire game. This new hybrid setup is all about those rockets. Now your Q will still pack a punch, but your auto attacks will be far less impactful when compared to the standard Corki setup, so you'll need to adapt to a bit of a different playstyle for this one. It's basically like playing Corki if he was a mage rather than a marksman. You lack the survivability and the sustain that you would gain from a Mortal Shield Bow, but you gain an absolutely absurd amount of burst from Luden's Tempest, and the magic penetration links up beautifully well with your passive. This build is mainly successful due to its ability to deal incredible amounts of AoE splash damage. You can genuinely delete entire teams with just 1 or 2 rockets, and the same goes for those minion waves and objectives, making you just a monster all around the rift. Anyway, let's dive straight into it, and first off let's talk about your runes. First Strike is definitely going to be the best rune for this setup. You have great range on these rockets, so you can easily proc it and keep farming it. It also helps give you more burst in those shorter trades. It's also super handy as the gold gain from this rune also significantly helps out when you're just trying to get to those power spikes earlier. After that you want to grab yourself boots, cookies, and then cosmic insight to finish. The second part of your runes is super important too. Taste of Blood is going to help you sustain throughout the lane phase, but Ultimate Hunter is really where the magic happens. This build is heavily focused on damaging your enemies with your rockets, and this rune gives you more of them. What's not to like? For your skill order, maxing your Q is definitely the way to go as it helps you farm, it deals decent damage, and it's basically your only other button to press aside from your ultimate. After that you can max your E second, and finally your W to finish. Now onto the main thing which makes this build so busted, the itemization. So the core build is going to be Muramana, Sorcerer's Shoes, Ravenous Hydra, Luden's Tempest, and Void Staff. This is almost always the build you'll follow, and then the final item is pretty situational and entirely up to you. These situational items are Zhonya's Hourglass, Guardian Angel, Banshee's Vale, Shadow Flame, Maw of Malmortius, or even Death's Dance. Remember that in this build you don't really need AP, you need AD and magic penetration, so buying a Rabadon's is really not going to do that much for you. We advise getting something that may keep you alive instead, like a Zhonya's or a Guardian Angel, but any of these options will work if you build them in the right game. So you're going to want to start with your tier so you can stack it up as quickly as possible. Getting you that Muramana gives you an insane power spike, so any way you can get this item earlier is definitely worthwhile. Muramana makes your abilities deal a ton of damage, which is why it's always been so good on champions like Corki and Ezreal, and in this build it's even better. Once you've completed this and secured your Sorcerer's Shoes for some early magic penetration, you want to go for your Ravenous Hydra as soon as possible. Ravenous Hydra gives you sustain, ability haste, omnivamp, and a good amount of damage too, but the best part about this is that it introduces even more splash damage to your rockets. Now this is really what makes your rockets deal so much AoE damage, and this is why you'll be topping the damage charts at the end of every single game. After your Ravenous Hydra, you want to finally get yourself that mythic item, which is going to be a Luden's Tempest. Once you've got this item, it's definitely where you come to life with this build. It gives you a brilliant amount of magic penetration, which is just awesome on this champion as he deals primarily magic damage due to his passive. This is by far the biggest power spike you're going to get, not only in its damage, but in its ability haste contributions too, meaning you can literally spam those rockets permanently. Once you're at this stage, you should feel like all of a sudden you understand what all of the hype is about. You will genuinely feel like you're cheating. The consistent damage you can do with these endless rockets is absolutely absurd, so make sure the second you finish these items, you start fighting and abuse just how strong you are at this point in the game. After your Luden's Tempest, you can either get yourself one of the situational items that we mentioned earlier, or alternatively, you can just skip that and go straight for your Void Staff. The Void Staff definitely completes your build, and when you've got this, you'll feel like an absolute monster. So in the lane phase, you're going to want to be pretty cautious not to get too far behind and keep things fairly simple. As long as you don't int, you will absolutely slap once you get to those 2 or 3 items. You don't need to be too much of a whiskey delta though, as you can still trade pretty often in most matchups, especially against those melee lanes. Now you may struggle a little bit versus champs who can poke and outrange you, and also those difficult mobile assassins who can dive on you often. In longer range lanes, just try to win the poke war and avoid overstaying and risking dying. Shoving and basing is always a viable option, especially if you've taken teleport or if your passive is ready. Versus mobile assassins, don't use your W aggressively and make sure you save it for when they try and fight you. As soon as you level 6 though, all types of lanes are now far easier. You can farm, poke and trade with your rockets, and you're now just waiting for those items to destroy the entire map. Don't forget, in lane you can also deal AoE damage to your enemies with your big rocket when they're hiding behind the back minions. In the mid game you still need to make sure you're keeping up the farming and scaling simulator, but you can definitely start joining fights and start to make your mark on the game. All you have to do to actually contribute in fights is genuinely just spam your ultimate. Keep those rockets flying as much as you can and keep your positioning in mind to ensure you don't get popped by any major threats. Remember, you're playing a marksman, well kind of, so one piece of CC and you are as good as dead. Sit nice and far out the way with your W on speed dial. In the late game you're going to be an absolute powerhouse, and now it's time to just put your rocket skills to the test. The more you land, the more you win, simple as that. This build revolves so heavily around your rockets that fights will come down to how many successful ones you actually land. Try to sit behind your front line and fire them out as often as possible, or even look to get behind teams with a flank and pop those squishies who think they're safe in the backline. Once you've played literally one game of this hybrid Corki build, you should definitely understand your role and just how much damage you'll do with your ultimate, so there's really not much more explaining to do. The last thing that we're going to mention about playing Corki is just to do with his passive, and honestly, it's not actually much different to using the standard Corki setup. Corki's passive is absolutely busted, and people have been sleeping on it for a crazy amount of time now. Corki's passive will not only help you get back to lane quicker and kind of feel like a free teleport if you need it, but it genuinely allows you to roam so easily and pick up kills around the map throughout the game. If you time it right around objective fights, it can be an easy way to overthrow skirmishes and get working towards that Dragon Soul as quickly as possible. If you get Hextech Soul, Infernal Soul, or even God forbid Elder Dragon on Corki, it's pretty much an instant win. Don't forget that Corki's W in his passive deals an astronomical amount of DPS, and even if they aren't sitting in that W zone, they're still going to take a mammoth amount of damage as long as they got hit by the initial blast. So that's going to conclude everything you need to know about playing this new crazy hybrid Corki build. Let us know in the comments if you've tried it yet and how strong you actually think it is. Thanks for watching guys, and we're going to see you in the next video. And as always, take care.